Medicine. That's what they keep me on. All the medicine. They make me take it all the time. Medicine, medicine, medicine. It makes the pain go away. But it also makes me remember the things. The things that happened to send me here. My name is Alexander. And this is my encounter. The scream woke me and my wife from our sleep. It was our son, Maxwell. For a second, I thought it was a nightmare, until one of his screams cut off abruptly. It didn't trail off as if he'd realized it had been a dream. I mean, it just stopped. Whoever had killed his friend so brutally at the abandoned school must have been in our house. My wife grabbed her cell phone from the bedside table as I moved to my dresser, opening the sock drawer and pulling out my old pistol. I wasted no time in rushing out of our bedroom and down the hall. The minute I reached those steps, I was stampeding up them. As I sprinted down the corridor, I heard glass shatter and I didn't even stop to turn the knob. I slammed into my son's bedroom door at full force, knocking it off its hinges. I nearly vomited at the sight before me. Blood was smeared along the floor and ceiling. And my son's head, eyes and nose missing, was propped up under the shattered window to face the doorway. Written around the window were the words, "Released from torment." If I was the bastard who had done this to my son. I hurried out of the room and back down to my wife. She was at the bottom of the stairs. I set the gun aside and grabbed her shoulders, telling her that she did not want to see what had happened. I continued to plead until the police arrived. I sat with her as the officers went upstairs. I heard one of them scream in horror the minute they reached the top of the stairs, looking down the hall into my son's room. The next few hours passed by in a blur. The officers asked us to check into a local motel while they investigated the murder. My wife said only one thing. Why would somebody do this? I couldn't give her an answer. I didn't have one for her. The next few days were horrible, knowing her son was dead. My wife could hardly drag herself out of bed in the mornings. And when she was on her feet, she didn't do much. I spent my time looking after her and dealing with well-meant but unhelpful condolences. A week after my son's death, I saw it. That thing. It took my son. He described it to us just hours before it had killed him. We were still staying at the motel. The main reason being that I couldn't get my wife to leave the building without forcefully carrying her out, kicking, and screaming. I couldn't do that to her. I was outside, sitting in a plastic chair outside our room. Sleep was still clinging to my mind. I was lazily looking around. My gaze went right past it before I realized what I'd seen. My eyes shot to look at it. It was in the tree line across the street. It seemed to be made of shadows. Its blood-red eyes bored into me. I froze. I couldn't respond in any way. An 18-wheeler trundled past, and once it had gone by, the thing was nowhere to be seen. Needless to say, I immediately went back inside and locked the door. Did I tell what I'd seen to my wife? No. I didn't need her even more emotionally unhinged. I went back to work the next day, just kept to myself. As expected, all of my coworkers were trying to be sympathetic. I know they meant well, but it was nothing more than dumping salt on an open wound. My days fell into routine. A month passed, and during that time I managed to convince my wife to move back into the house. She spent her time trying to get the police to turn over our son's remains so that we could have a proper funeral. The police continued to refuse, claiming the need for evidence. As much as it hurt, I could understand slightly. If we wanted our son's killer to be brought to justice, if something like that could be brought to justice, then we needed to let the police do their work. My wife didn't see it that way. Every other day she wound up screaming into the phone and would continue to do so until I'd take the phone away and hang up. This went on for another month, until they finally turned over the body to us, and we made preparations for a funeral. It was a closed casket. There was no way I'd make my wife or any of our relatives see the horror which that fucking monster had turned our son into. The sun was beginning to set, casting odd shadows across the graveyard. I looked at the other faces in the crowd, and my stomach churned when my gaze fell upon my son. His eye sockets were hollow, blood dripping from them. His nose was decaying as he stared in horror. Nobody else seemed to notice. As I glanced to see if anyone else was seeing this, I discovered nobody was moving at all. My feet wouldn't respond. I was fixed in this spot as this gruesome parody of my son rotted before my eyes. I wanted to vomit, and I nearly pissed myself when his eye sockets began to emit a red light. Then he spoke in a twisted, inhuman voice.
Released from torment.
I shut my eyes. I didn't want to see this anymore. I didn't open my eyes again until I felt my wife's hand on my shoulder. I looked around. The apparition was gone. Had I imagined it? I must have. I'd probably imagined the shadow monster back at the motel as well. That night, I was climbing out of the shower and I looked into the mirror. The exhaust fan in our shower was broken, so the steam from the shower caused the mirrors to fog up. That's not what bothered me. What bothered me were the words traced into the condensation. The same words painted in blood around the shattered window. The same words that the apparition from the funeral had spoken. Except there were 4 new words as well. You too will be released from torment. My knees buckled and I crumpled to the floor. Whatever killed my son was coming for me now. I told my wife what I'd seen. She was convinced I was seeing things and told me I shouldn't be trying to upset her. And that's when the power went out. The room was thrown into total darkness. My wife screamed and dropped to the floor. At least I assume that's what the sudden thump was. I turned to reach for the switch to test it. The blood-red eyes were inches from mine. I hollered and leapt back. Just as the lights came on, showing me the full horror of the... nothing. There was nothing there. God damn it. This fucking nonsense was driving me mad. I had to sleep. I helped my wife up and we locked ourselves in the bedroom, lying in bed under the sheets. I closed my eyes, and the moment sleep hit me, I was assaulted with a nightmare. I was walking through an endless hospital corridor. As I walked, the walls seemed to decay. The paint chipped, and the doors seemed to rot. It's like the corridor was aging as I progressed. I could hear the screams of people as I walked, as if they were either scared or in horrible, horrible pain. I couldn't bear it. I put my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it all. It made me flash back to those 5 years I spent in the hospital after the accident. The pain I'd been in, agony.
The torment. You were like these people once, Alexander. You prayed for a reprieve from the pain, and now you shall be granted it, whether you want it or not.
That woke me up. I sat up screaming in fear. I clutched the sheets in a cold sweat. What the fuck? I whispered to myself. I turned to wake my wife and tell her what I'd seen. She wasn't there. My God. Had it... I heard her sobbing from the living room. She was mourning Maxwell's death anew. I got out of the bed and hurried to the living room. At least it hadn't taken her. She was facing away from me. Honey? I quietly called. I couldn't see from behind her, but it seemed she had her hands over her chest. I took another step, and she turned to me. The first thing I noticed was the knife. What was she doing with a... My eyes panned up to meet hers. They were blood red. It had taken her, and now it was taking her form as it did my son's at the funeral. I turned and dashed back to the bedroom. I could hear that parody of her flailing and scrambling after me. I slammed and locked the door, vaulting over the bed to grab my pistol, and its magazine was buried under a bunch of socks. I could hear that demonic thing slamming itself against the door. It was going to give out any minute. I found the magazine with trembling fingers, lifted it up, and dropped it to the floor. I leaned down to grab it. I straightened up and inserted the magazine just as the door gave way. As it began to turn, I felt the knife being plunged into my back. My legs lost all feeling, and I was forced to grab the dresser to keep myself up. I managed to turn through the pain to aim the pistol. The parody of my wife actually put its mouth over the barrel, as if giving me the shot. I didn't waste it, I fired. In the second before the gun fired, I saw the glow leave her eyes, which was replaced by horror at what was about to happen. The blood splattered along with brain matter against the far wall. It hadn't been a duplicate. It possessed her, forced me to kill her. I could hear sirens down the street. Police. But why were they? That made no sense. That demon manifested on the edge of my bed.
I called them, Alexander. After all, you did kill your wife and son. Such a waste of humanity.
You are the one that killed my son, you bastard.
But will the officers of your law believe you if you tell them this was all my doing?
I thought you said you were going to release me from my torment.
I did, but I never promised to refrain from subjecting you to more.
The thing disappeared as the cops kicked down the door. I can't believe it. My son was right. And now I was paying for it.